Hi guys, my name's Marcel, and man, do I love inking. I don't care about the art style, I ink portraits, anime, manga pages, mechanical stuff. I just love inking so much, I love it more than Genshin Impact players love miners. And in today's video, I'll show you what materials you need to start inking, their pros, their cons, what you should pick up, how to improve your line art, and so on. As you can see, this video was a lot of work, as always, and that's why for the first time in forever, I actually accepted a sponsorship. Because you know what else I like, besides inking? That's right, watching anime. What I don't like, however, is watching anime in Deutschland! One of my favorite manga, Summertime Render, just released as an anime and I can't watch it because of Deutschland! Some shows are blocked here in my country, but with the help of NordVPN, I can get shows like Dr. Stone or One Punch Man back on my Netflix. And that's because NordVPN allows you to virtually change your location, and with that, I can access shows and services that are not initially available in my country. Don't worry, NordVPN has service in 58 countries like Japan for you fellow weebs out there. If you quickly head over to nordvpn/drawlikeasir, you can not only get NordVPN's cybersecurity package, but also a whole month of NordVPN for free. And there is no risk involved since there's a 30 days money back guarantee. If you want to support me, I'd be happy if you at least click the link in the description. Thanks for the opportunity, Nord, and now we can go and start inking. Let's go. So, for starters, I'll show you my favorite methods when it comes to inking. There are 3 very popular methods to ink your artwork. With pen and ink, with liners, and on a tablet. Working with digital line art is a whole beast for itself, but don't worry if you work on a tablet, I'll also mention some tips in this video for you as well. For the material, we'll be focusing on traditional media though. I guess most of you are already inking with liners. They are basically the cheapest method when it comes to inking. They are also pretty easy to use, and of course they are pretty much available in every store in every corner of the world. Though I'm not completely sure about that last part. I haven't been to Whiskey Dick Mountain yet, but if you're from there, just let me know if they got liners there. Of course, there are cons here as well. The main reason why a lot of pros avoid liners is because they fade upon erasing. Pretty sure you've noticed that yourself at some point. It's pretty jarring when you make, for example, a black and white comic or manga page, and instead of clear jet black lines, your page is more like grayish. Also, with liners you only have fixed sizes, which is okay as a beginner, but I, for example, like to get as detailed as I can. And as you can see, even a 0.05 liner stands no chance against my Maru pen. And speaking of inking with pen and ink, let's take a closer look at that as well. Just to clear things up, for inking with dip pens you need a handle and, of course, the actual pen nib. Combined, you use it by, as the name implies, dipping it into the ink and then drawing with it. I personally like to use different pen nibs, but for the sake of this video, we'll be looking at the one, the only, the iconic G-Pen. It's a pen nib that gets used by pretty much every traditional manga artist out there, but I also use it for non-manga art, and it works just as good. If you want to know what exact handle or G-Pen or ink I'm using, just head over to my website. I linked all of my art supplies there, so you can be sure that you buy the exact same products as I did. Anyway, inking with pen and nib is incredibly expensive. It's also pretty hard to use as a beginner, and the wear down is pretty intense as well. So, as you can see, I would not recommend you starting out with those, but I cannot stop you if you actually want to do this. A couple of these can cost a pretty penny already, and after drawing a very detailed artwork, you can see how worn out these nibs get. I mean, look at that, they aren't nearly as detailed after that anymore. Also, you can basically only order them online, because if you were to go into a stationery shop and ask them if they have a G or Maru pen, they'd look at you like, you're coming from Whiskey Dick Mountain or something. So why in heaven's name is everyone using these? You know, with all the cons and stuff. Like I just showed you, the details you can get with these are amazing. They are so thin I can't even measure a pen stroke in millimeters. Also, they have very natural line weight, which gives everything you ink with it such a beautiful natural vibe. With the G-Pen you can go from this to this within the same line. That's absolutely amazing. And it doesn't matter how thin your lines are, they don't fade if you erase over them. At least if you use decent ink along with it.
But how do I know what kind of ink I should buy? Can you recommend something? Oh, right. Yeah, sorry.
Having ink that doesn't fade is extremely important when it comes to drawing black and white artworks or manga pages. Also, I think it's pretty cool that you can exchange ink colors. And I'm not just talking about red or blue or black. For example, I got into using white ink for highlighting, you know, instead of using gel pens. And that's because all of these pros that have been listed before now also apply to my highlights as well when I use white ink. Like I said though, this is not easy. A lot of people have trouble using pen and ink because it always looks way easier than it actually is. I myself have trouble from time to time when I try out new ink or new art supplies, so maybe I can make a separate video specifically about dip pens and how to use them. So if you did enjoy this video, maybe I'll make a second part. That's up to you. Also, let's take a quick look at your paper. I'll make a little overview so you don't get confused with this. First of all, liners pretty much work with most papers. There won't be any problem here. It's almost the same with pen and ink. It works on marker paper as well as watercolor and manga and any other thick papers, but don't use it on regular printer paper. That stuff's way too thin. It only works on printer paper if you use especially thick one. And now I'd say that's enough for now when it comes to your supplies. Let's finally put these to use. Before inking, you obviously need a sketch. I always draw those on some cheap recycling paper because after that I just trace my sketch on more expensive paper. You can do that the Amish way with, you know, windows and a bit of stamina in your arms, or just like me with a light pad. Tracing your sketch to a clean piece of paper also has the advantage that you now don't have these sketchy, ambiguous lines, but instead you have very clear paths that you just need to trace with your liners or pen. Now, of course, there are some no-brainer tips, like always ink from left to right, so you don't smudge anything, or, you know, the other way around if you're left-handed. Yes, this also goes for using liners. You can still smudge them if you have sweaty hands. The only method this isn't relevant for is, of course, digital line art. What the fuck? Something that you always have to keep in mind is to ink the same way that you sketch. If you sketch fast lines, you should also ink these lines with the same speed, so that they have the same energy. So just avoid inking slowly and carefully. Don't ink like that. I mean, nobody sketches like that as well. Or at least nobody should sketch like that.
I sketch like that.
You should always use your wrist. Makes your line look more dynamic and stuff. And with bigger lines, you can even use your whole elbow. That's also something that applies the exact same way to digital line art for a change. Additionally, you could also use stabilizers with most apps. Just make sure not to overdo it or your lines will become unnaturally smooth. I would always say you should leave stabilization to a minimum if you can. And now that you know how to ink, let's also try to improve your line art. If you want to get your line art from this to that, there are some things you have to understand first. Inking is not just about tracing a line. Inking is about taking a sketch and making it better and better, just like grinding a diamond. But how do you get there? Well, this point is pretty hard to explain, which is why I'll show you one of my favorite examples that really stuck with me. There's this manga series called Bakuman. It's a bit older, it's about
10 years old. What?
It's a manga about, well, drawing manga specifically. But I can really recommend it if you're new with Japanese comics. I've really learned a lot by reading it. Anyways, there's this specific scene where the protagonist inks two different artworks. One with a detailed sketch and one with a very simple one. But then his co-author points out that the latter one has some points where it's actually better. So this is the point where it gets clear that an inked artwork is less about drawing a beautiful sketch and more about how good you can ink it later on. And this is why he starts drawing less details in his sketch and instead adds these later on while inking. And that's so true when you think about it. Let me show you an example from one of my artworks. Like, how would you ink this sketch right here I've made recently? You wouldn't even know where to start because there are so many details and pen strokes. But with a more overseeable sketch, you tend to have a way easier time. And that's the reason why instead of drawing a very detailed sketch, I always draw a very simple sketch instead. And then I know where all the details go, so I can add them later on while inking. What I'm trying to tell you is you shouldn't render your sketch or focus too much on it, because the step you should actually be focusing on rendering is the line art. Don't forget what I showed you before, having a simple path that you only need to follow is priceless. That's why I only work with simpler sketches that are not insanely detailed. I even erase some of my details before inking because I know I'll just add the details later on. And when working on a tablet, I would suggest you play around with layer opacity so you can always have the contrast between your sketch and your line art. Another tip to improve, watch your black value. What I want to say is that the more ink you apply, the less empty your line art looks. Try incorporating more shadows or details in some places. It might not seem like it, but this makes your artwork look a lot less empty. But shadows aren't the only way to introduce more black to your line art. Things like the aforementioned line variation also adds a bit more ink to your artwork. Of course, this works perfectly with a dip or G-pen. With liners, you need to artificially work this in. The cool thing is, this isn't just for show either. You can make some cool effects with thin or thick lines. For example, you could use thick outlines to highlight a character. That's especially important if there are other characters or more details in the background. Thick outlines could also suggest something like distance. You obviously want to convey to your reader or viewer that something's closer by highlighting it with a black outline. My favorite example though has to be light and shadow. Maybe you already saw this in manga or comic where there is an explosion or a transformation happening. You have thinner outlines to a point where they seem like they are fading because the light is too strong. Also, speaking of it, not only thick but also thin lines can be very important. Instead of painting an area black with thick lines, you could use thin liners to create a texture. The most common thing to do this with is hair, but if you get creative, you can even make things like clothing that way. Assuming you have the patience to do so, because this took me forever. So as you could see, there are a lot of ways to improve your line work besides just trace the line. And to be honest, that's why the statement of somehow my sketch looked better makes me cringe. Yes, the sketch that took you 2 hours to draw does indeed look better than the line arted version that you probably inked in like 10 minutes. And you're sitting there like, I'm not sure why my sketch always looks better than my line art. Yeah, I wonder why that could be. Just watch my video about this topic if you still don't get it. So, for the next time you make a line art, I've made this handy little checklist for you to check out in order to make your line art better. No, you don't have to thank me. No, I'm glad I could help. I don't want anything in return. Also, if you want to learn how to draw textures like this or how to actually get detail with your inking, I have a whole video about hatching. Or instead, you could just check out my other tutorials if you want it. I'd be happy if you joined my crew. Become a Nakama and subscribe. Well then, my name's been Marcel, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Goodbye.